There's something weird going on with Spider-Man. Every few years, Hollywood tries to reboot him. Different actor, different director, different tone. And every single time, people show up. Not just show up, they lose their minds. No Way Home made $1.9 billion. Not because it was a perfect film, but because people needed to be there. Meanwhile, you've got heroes with bigger budgets, more marketing, more cinematic universe buildup, and they're struggling to get people off their couches. Superman has been rebooted so many times that the discourse around him outlasts the films themselves. The Flash movie happened and most people forgot about it before the Blu-ray dropped. But Spider-Man keeps winning. Every version, every era, every actor. So the real question isn't, is Spider-Man popular? That's obvious. The real question is, why does this keep working when everything else is so inconsistent? And I think the answer has nothing to do with special effects or marketing budgets. It goes way deeper than that. Let's start with the character himself, because this is where everything begins. Peter Parker is not a billionaire. He's not a god. He's not a super soldier created by a government program. He's a kid from Queens who can't always make rent, who's late to class, who's trying to keep a relationship alive while the city literally depends on him surviving the night. And here's what Stan Lee understood when he created him back in 1962. Most superheroes were power fantasies. You read them and you thought, I wish I was that. But Peter Parker was different. You read him and thought, that is me. The stress, the bad timing, the feeling that no matter how hard you try, something is always falling apart. That's not a superhero story. That's just Tuesday. But what makes it hit even harder is the responsibility angle. Because Peter didn't ask for any of this. He got bitten by a spider, thought it was cool, and then the one moment he chose to look the other way, his uncle died. And that moment broke him in a way that never fully healed. Every villain he fights, every sacrifice he makes traces back to that one decision. That guilt isn't a backstory detail. It's the engine of everything he does. With great power comes great responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility.
People quote that line like it's a cliche now, but think about what it actually means for a second. It's not a motivational poster. It's a burden. It's saying, you don't get to choose whether you carry this weight. You already have the power, so the responsibility is already yours whether you want it or not. That's a dark idea dressed up in a simple sentence. And it gives every Spider-Man film an emotional foundation that most superhero movies don't even try to build. Now here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Peter Parker built everything himself. The suit, him. The web shooters, him. The formulas, the gadgets, the way he figured out how to swing between buildings without dying, all him. He didn't inherit a fortune. He didn't get handed a Batcave or a team of engineers. He sat in his room and figured it out. And that changes how you feel watching him. When Tony Stark builds something, it's impressive, but it's also expected. The man has unlimited resources. When Peter builds something, you feel it differently, because he built it with what he had, which wasn't much. That's the kind of character that stays with you, not because he's the most powerful, but because his wins feel earned in a way that other heroes' wins don't always feel. And then there's the world he lives in. Gotham is a fictional city. Metropolis is a fictional city. But Spider-Man lives in New York. Real New York. You see the subway, the bridges, the neighborhoods. You see him swinging through streets that actually exist. And that grounds everything in a way that's hard to explain but easy to feel. When he's protecting the city, it doesn't feel abstract. It feels like he's protecting something real, something you could actually visit. And for people who live in New York or have ever been there, it hits completely different. The city isn't just a backdrop in Spider-Man films. It's almost a character, pushes back on him. It has its own energy, and that relationship between Peter and New York is part of what makes the stakes feel genuine every single time. Now let's talk about the villains, because this is something people genuinely overlook when they're trying to figure out why Spider-Man works so consistently. Most superhero villains exist to be defeated. They show up, they cause chaos, they get punched into unconsciousness or blown up or thrown into space. And that's fine. But Spider-Man's villains have always been built differently. Take Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2. Otto Octavius isn't evil because he was born evil or because he wants to watch the world burn. He was a brilliant scientist who lost everything. His life's work, his wife, his identity. The tentacles didn't just attach to his body. They attached to his mind and slowly pulled him away from who he was. And there's a scene where he's sitting in the dark talking to the arms like they're real.
Listen to me now. Listen to me now.
and it's genuinely unsettling. Not because he's scary, because he's tragic. Or look at Sandman in Spider-Man 3. Yes, that film has problems, but the Sandman's motivation, a father trying to get money to save his dying daughter, is more human than half the protagonists in other superhero films. You understand him before you fear him. And then there's Mysterio in Far From Home. A man who was talented, who built real things, who got pushed aside and had his work taken from him, and then constructed an entire fake reality to get what he felt he deserved. In a different film, with a different framing, Mysterio could have been the hero. That's the pattern. Spider-Man's villains almost always have a point. They're not wrong about everything, and that makes the conflict mean something more than just good guy versus bad guy. It makes Peter's victories feel complicated, because sometimes beating the villain means defeating someone who was broken by the same world that's trying to break Peter. Now we need to talk about something that should not have worked but somehow became one of the biggest cinematic moments of the last decade, the multiverse. When No Way Home was announced, a lot of people were skeptical. Bringing back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield felt like a nostalgia play, like a studio move, like they were just pulling emotional strings to sell tickets. And honestly, that criticism wasn't unfair. But then the film came out, and something happened that nobody fully predicted. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was closure. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man never got a proper ending. The Amazing Spider-Man series was cut short, Gwen Stacy died, and that version of Peter was just left there, broken, unfinished. And then No Way Home gave him a moment. He catches MJ. He saves the person he couldn't save in his own universe. And watching him realize what just happened, the relief, the pain, the gratitude, that scene hit people in a way that had nothing to do with CGI or action choreography. Tobey Maguire showing up and just being calm and grounded and almost fatherly to the other two. That worked because it felt true to who that version of Peter became after everything he went through. But here's the deeper point. The reason the multiverse worked for Spider-Man specifically, and not just as a gimmick, is because the character has always been about identity. Who is Peter Parker under the mask? What does he owe the world? Where does his responsibility end? These are questions that genuinely have different answers depending on which version of him you're looking at. So putting three versions in the same room wasn't just fan service. It was actually the most honest exploration of the character's core question. What does it mean to be Spider-Man? No other hero could have carried that concept with the same emotional weight, because no other hero's entire mythology is so built around that single identity question. And this brings us to the generational thing, because it's real and it matters more than people admit. If you grew up in the early 2000s, Tobey Maguire is Spider-Man. That's just the truth of it. Those films defined something for a generation of kids who were watching their first real superhero movies. The train scene in Spider-Man 2, where the passengers see his face and then form a wall to protect him, that scene made grown adults cry in 2004, and it still does. If you grew up slightly later, Andrew Garfield's version connected differently. More awkward, more self-aware, a little more real in his comedic timing. And his chemistry with Emma Stone as Gwen was genuinely one of the best romantic dynamics in any superhero film. People were devastated when that series ended. Not just disappointed, actually devastated. And then Tom Holland's version came in and somehow captured an entirely new generation while also being embraced by the people who grew up with the previous two. Because his Peter felt younger, more vulnerable, still figuring it out. The mentor relationship with Tony Stark gave the MCU version an emotional anchor that made his losses, especially in Endgame and then in No Way Home, genuinely painful to watch. 3 actors, 3 completely different tones, 3 different generations of fans, and all 3 versions are defended passionately by the people who grew up with them. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because the foundation of the character is strong enough to survive reinvention. You can change the actor, the aesthetic, the supporting cast, but the core of Peter Parker remains intact. The responsibility, the guilt, the refusal to quit even when quitting would be so much easier. Let's talk about Superman for a second, because the comparison is important and it tells you a lot about why Spider-Man works where others don't. Superman is the original, the template, the reason the superhero genre exists in the way it does. And on paper, he should be the most beloved superhero in cinema. He's been around longer, he's more iconic in terms of pure visual recognition, and his symbol is arguably the most famous in the world. But something keeps going wrong. Every time Hollywood tries to make a Superman film that resonates the way Spider-Man films resonate, It either divides people completely or gets forgotten. Man of Steel came out in 2013 and people are still arguing about it. Not in the fun way people argue about Spider-Man 3. In the exhausting way where nobody can agree on what the character is even supposed to be. And I think the reason is actually simple. Superman is aspirational in a way that creates distance. He's perfect. He's almost infinitely powerful. He has no real personal struggles that feel relatable on a human level. His problems are cosmic. His enemies have to be gods or monsters or apocalyptic threats just to give him something to do. And that gap between who he is and who we are is too wide to fully close emotionally. Peter Parker's problems are never cosmic. Even when he's fighting an alien symbiote or a multiversal villain, his real problem is still the rent, still the relationship, still the guilt about the people he couldn't save. The scale of the threat goes up, but the humanity stays exactly the same size. And that's the balance that's almost impossible to get right. Spider-Man gets it right almost every time. Batman is a closer comparison because he's also grounded and human. But Batman is a fantasy of a different kind. He's the fantasy of having unlimited resources and turning trauma into pure discipline and will, which is compelling, but it's still a fantasy. You can admire Batman, you can be in awe of him, but you don't really see yourself in him the way you see yourself in Peter Parker. Peter is the only one where the fantasy isn't, "I wish I had his life." The fantasy is, "I wish I handled my life the way he handles his." And that's a completely different emotional relationship with a character. There's one more thing I want to say before we wrap this up, and it's something that I think gets missed in most conversations about why Spider-Man works. He never wins cleanly. Think about it. Go through every Spider-Man film and find me a victory that didn't cost him something real. Spider-Man 1. He saves the day, but he loses the girl because he decides he can't put her in danger. Spider-Man 2. He gets MJ, but he loses his secret identity to half of New York. Spider-Man 3. He defeats the villains, but Gwen's father dies and his friendship with Harry is destroyed before it's repaired. The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He stops Electro and saves the city and loses Gwen. Homecoming. He earns Tony's respect and turns down the Avengers because he realizes he's not ready, which is a win that feels like a loss. Far From Home. He tries to have a normal trip to Europe and ends up with his identity exposed to the entire world. No Way Home. He saves everyone and loses everything. Everyone forgets him. He starts over completely alone. Every single time he pays. The victory is real, but the price is always real too. And that's not just good storytelling. That's the whole thesis of the character. The responsibility doesn't come with a reward. It just comes with more responsibility. And Peter keeps showing up anyway, not because he's rewarded, not because it gets easier, but because he genuinely believes it's the right thing to do. That's why people connect with him across generations, across reboots, across completely different tones and aesthetics and actors. Because at the core of it, Spider-Man is a story about choosing to do the right thing even when it costs you everything. And that idea doesn't get old. It doesn't go out of style. It doesn't need a cinematic universe or a post-credit scene or a billion-dollar budget to land. It just needs Peter Parker, a kid from Queens who built his own web shooters and never stopped showing up. And honestly, that's enough. That's always been enough. But here's something I want to leave you with. Something I don't think enough people actually sit down and think about. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Is there another superhero out there, in any universe, any studio, any medium, who could go through everything Peter Parker goes through, lose everything he loses, and still make you believe it's worth it? Because I've been thinking about it for a while, and I keep coming back to the same answer. I don't think there is. Thanks for watching to the end. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.